Not I, but Christ. Not I, but Christ. Not I, but Christ, the hope of glory within me, living within me. Like, yay! Yay! It's amazing. It really is. I'm going to invite you guys to turn to Matthew 18. And I want to talk this morning on practical humility that unlocks the kingdom. Because over the past probably 12 months or so, so first of all, for people like Ricky who are up here like week after week, hats off to you guys. And for those subs that they call in every once in a while, like we have it easy because we can take this extended period of our journey and we can condense it down into a message. So this is this is a part of where God has been taking me over the past 12 months, and he's been taking me deeper and deeper into his heart. And I've been learning more and more the power of what it means to live in his peace, live in his rest, live in his joy, and not to take on any burden except that which is his. And I've wondered for a long time, the word pride and humility have been very vague terms for me, and this hopefully will bring some definition to it this morning. And the story that we're going to look at is actually kind of interesting. You actually see probably a more interesting context in Luke, where it is wrapped in this whole section of all of these different pieces that are pointed to the idea of losing your life. It talks about Lot's wife. And when Jesus is talking about Lot's wife, he talks about whoever seeks to preserve his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life will keep it. He talks about the Pharisee and the tax collector, and the lowly being made low and being heard. He talks about the children, which is what we're going to look at here. He talks about the rich young ruler and about going through the eye of the needle. And each of these, there's this thread running through of losing your life to find it. So Matthew 18, verse 1. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus saying, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" Which is an interesting question. And calling to him a child, he put them in the midst of them, and he said, "Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives such child in my name receives me, but whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and to be drowned in the depth of the sea." And as is the way with Jesus, I think we find that Jesus oftentimes finds ways to say multiple things in one. Like sometimes it feels to me like when Jesus speaks, there's multiple lines of thought that are concurrent. And here he's talking about, well, you have to be like a child in order to enter the kingdom. Oh, and by the way, when you receive a child in the natural, you're receiving me as well. And I think what I've come to understand is that there's this aspect of understanding what it means to actually be like a child. And we've all heard different phrases and different ways of people that say this about having childlike faith and all of these types of things. But Jesus makes it clear that understanding how to enter the kingdom is part of understanding the child. And so this morning is probably just going to be just as much taking this one statement of humility and being like a child, and probably honestly just as much of a testimony and a journey of where God has had me in this, and just kind of a look at practical, I guess the practical pieces. One of the first things that God began to deal with me on in the terms of childlikeness was around this understanding of human growth and development. And there's this understanding that when we are children, that children are full of mistakes. From beginning to end of the day. They're spilling food, they're falling over stuff, they're tripping over themselves, they're doing all kinds of things that are beyond, they're attempting things that are beyond their capacity to achieve. And somewhere when we, at least for me, maybe it's not like this for you guys, but somewhere when I reached this certain point and I said, now I'm done with that childlike living, and now I'm ready for the rest of the world. Because I've gone through all the education, formal education that I've gone through, now I must have achieved and arrived, and now we no longer have any kind of metric or measure. I no longer have any metric or measurement for my own growth and development, so therefore I must have arrived. And one of the things that this does is it puts an incredible pressure upon us to be perfect. And not only that, it puts we end up inadvertently putting an incredible amount of pressure on other people. And unfortunately, as a result of that way of thinking, I myself have been guilty of that. Because I'm looking at you, and I have this standard of where I believe you should be at in your growth and development. And we understand there's certain things that are normal. We would be worried if a kid isn't talking by the time, I think of the story of, I believe it was G.K. Chesterton, and from what I know, he didn't talk until he was like 7 or 8 years old. And most of us would be absolutely out of our minds, freaked out about it. And then he started talking and never quit writing. I don't know exactly what happened to him. But we understand there's certain milestones of where they should be at. And so if we understand that sometimes kids develop at different speeds, different ways, sometimes it's because of how they're wired, sometimes it's because of the environment they're in, for a lot of different reasons. Growth is development. It is variable. But we also understand sometimes there's catch-up development that needs to happen. So for myself, there were areas in my life that were extremely well developed as through the environment that I grew up in, and there are other parts of my life that were extremely underdeveloped. And so part of my journey over the last, especially 2 or 3 years, has been looking at those places where I've been underdeveloped and actively playing catch-up to develop those things more fully. So when I look at you, I understand, rather than holding this bar of judgment above you to say you should be here, or instead of doing that at this level, I have to give myself the grace to be on the process and path of growth and development. And I have to do the same thing to you. And it doesn't mean that I stay here. It means that I go through life, I make mistakes, these things happen, and I glean from them, I learn from them. And we'll talk more about how exactly we do this. And as we do this, we grow, and there's grace in that. You can't force a child. You can try to force a child to grow up more quickly than what they were intended to, but not without harm to the child. There is a speed at which a child grows and develops that is healthy and normal. And you don't want to slow that down, and you don't want to accelerate it. You want to happen at the rate that it's supposed to happen. And in all of this, there's also this trust in the timing of God. That there are things that God waited until I'm at this age, and there are things that he's waiting to show me until a future date and point in time, because that is the timeline of his development for me. And I can be at peace with that. I'm not perfect. I'm not fully mature. There is a timeline and a pathway that God has me on. And it's resting in that. We think of, because of this certain life event, certain life scenario, we should be at this level developmentally. And because of that, we end up putting pressure on ourselves. For those of you who are parents, sometimes you look at a 2 and a 3-year-old, or whatever age they are, maybe teenager, and you shake your head and be like, was I ever like this? Please, God, no. And yet we look back to those years, and we don't live those years in regret. I regret being a 2 or 3-year-old. I don't regret being a teenager. Maybe we regret some of the choices we made. But there's this understanding that we were young then, and we were at that stage of development. And in the same way, God invites us to learn and grow past our mistakes and failures. Which leads us into part number 2. And we could have started this whole thing, that a prerequisite for being a child is just straight up being born. And Jesus actually uses this example when he's talking to Nicodemus. Okay, so we're just going to lay that down as simple, little add-on. But the other thing about being a child, the second thing about so the first piece is about the process and growth of development, understanding that timeline. But then second of all is understanding the all-encompassing nature of the relationship of a parent. So, Josh and Jen, I'm going to pick on you guys because we're going to have some practical examples of this. So in terms of Madeline, right? And I got her name right. Yes, thank you. So in terms of Madeline, her life is an all-consuming life to you guys. And it has an impact on you. And you have to rearrange your life for where she is in this, and she needs you guys for everything. She is, there's a dependency and a need. And I think one of the things that surprised me about the kingdom of God and what it means to walk with God is the all-encompassing nature of that. There is no boundaries in my life where God does not want to participate in. And I think one of the reasons why I have struggled sometimes to hear the voice of God in situations is because I have compartmentalized him. And I have said, even when there was a hunger to walk with the Father in my place of work, there was still this separation of this is actually what he cares about, and this is what is more important to him. And so while I'm over here in my place of work, I want to hear from him, but I have this value system that actually prevents me from listening to him. So it's a push and pull. At once, I am crying out to him because I want his wisdom in my day-to-day. On the other hand, I'm pushing him away because I believe that what's more valuable is what he speaks to us on Sunday morning. And there's this weird change that has happened for me because those of you who know me know that I care about the people of God and I care about where they're at in their spiritual journey. And yet there's been this shift that church isn't the point. The all-encompassing nature of the kingdom, the life that we live with people, that is the point. It is people. And this is church is only the grounds to build us up and to develop each other and to stand strong beside each other, encourage one another. And the actual, I've certainly heard this. This was not a new idea for me, but it landed in my heart in a completely different way. That literally what I'm called to is my family, yes, because I'm developing and growing leaders within that space, but it's also my Monday through Friday. That's what I'm called to. And I'm seeing, the more that I surrender to the all-encompassing nature of my relationship with God, and I understand that God actually wants a complete and utter dependency in the same way that Madeline has a deep dependency on God through all of life. That's me. And the more that I do that, and the more I've surrendered to that, the more I've seen him at work in that. It is in Madeline's engagement with her parents that she receives food, nurture, care, knowledge, growth, development, rest, all of the things that she needs for development. And with this, there's been this understanding for me that one of the primary things that God calls me to do is to engage with him. He wants to be present with me. Jesus said that the law can be summarized in this, which is this one thing, which is love. So if we have to boil this whole thing down, it is love. And not to diminish over all of the other things, and not to gloss over all those other things, but understanding the intimate, passionate care and attention that the Father has for his children is the foundation for all of the things that we experience in life. In fact, if you look at the theory of attachment, two of the core capacities that is important in developing a secure attachment is the ability to give and receive care. This is foundational. And I think in our relationship with God, this is absolutely, absolutely true. And with that, there's been a change of understanding with me of how God wants to engage. I used to look at my relationship with God as a series of statements and instructions from him, and every sentence ended with a period. And what I've come to understand is that when God speaks, he speaks sentences that ends with commas and question marks. When God engages with us, he's putting out a little hook. And he's saying, would you please, he's good, and so forgive any negative connotation, but he's like, would you please take the bait? Like, would you grab a hold of this? Because I want to engage with you in this. And I've found that many times in the leading of daily life, the ways that God leads me is he will lead me in a general direction. And if I were to take that leading with a period on the end of it, I would completely miss where he's wanting to take me. But he leads me in a general direction, but it ends with a comma and a question mark, and he's looking for engagement in the process. And it is actually in the questions that we often see God leading and working with us and speaking with us. So if you look at a kid, we know, sometimes to parents' chagrin, that kids ask 1,000,001 questions every single day because they're curious to learn, they're curious to understand. And as long as we know God doesn't get weary, we're not even going to go there. We know that we have no fear of wearying God with our questions. So we're human, happens to us, but not with him. And when we look at, just as an example, when we look at David in the Psalms, we see the example of David coming as a child, and in some cases, you look at him and he's railing at God for what he is doing. And there's been this shift in me because there have been things in my life that I really have not liked. And my instinct has been that God is not approachable enough that I cannot allow myself to express human emotion in his presence for fear of what he will think. But the truth is that God actually wants to engage with us, that he is not scared. He is our creator, and he is not fearful of that. And it is actually in the process of engaging with him that just like Jacob wrestling with the angel, it's that engaging with him that he has the opportunity to shift our perspective and to change us. He wants that. What would you rather have? Would you rather have a kid who's in defiance and completely runs away and disappears and wants to have no contact with you? Or would you rather have a child that though they don't want to do something, they are willing to engage with you in the process, and you can work with them and mold them and shape them and direct them? And that's exactly what it is with God. Like, he's not scared. We know that the Word of God is the grounding foundation for what is true, what is real. It is the grounding foundation. In the day-to-day life of walking with God, sometimes we have ideas of who we should or we should not be that keep us from following his leading and following where he wants us. We get to engage with him. I believe questions are a practical fruit of humility because they reveal the fact that we don't actually know the answer. I had to think of the I believe it is a proverb. I didn't look up the reference, but it is the statement that it is the glory of God to conceal a matter, and it is the glory of kings to seek it out. And how does the seeking it out happen? It happens through engaging with the Father. It comes with asking questions. And I want to use this as an example, not because. So what's happened for me in this is that. Actually, I'm going to give this example in just a little bit because I think there's one other piece that's really important. So the third piece of being a child is this understanding that there are cries that are not attached to words. So, Madeline wakes up, Madeline starts crying. Then there's the investigation. What's wrong? Is she tired? Is she hungry? Did she poop? Does she want to be held? Does she want to get down? What does she want? And Madeline doesn't have words to articulate what's wrong. The only thing she knows is something's wrong and something's got to change. And the other thing that I've found in my relationship with God, again, that he's had to deal with, is how much assumption I had put into my relationship with God. So there have been many times where there was a cry inside of my heart that did not have words, and in my desire to put definition to it, I jumped to a conclusion that wasn't actually God. So the cry that was in my heart was a cry that God put in my heart. The definition that I put on it was not the definition that was his. So what I've found in my journey, this is super, super practical. In the Monday through Friday, fill in the blank. I will be going through life, and the more sensitive that I am to him, I will I will walk into a situation, or I will, literally, sometimes as simple as opening an email, and there's something that's uncomfortable about it. And it's like that inward cry. It's like that cry, can you please help? I know something's not right, but I have no idea what's not right about this. And sometimes it's as simple as learning to probe and learning to dig, because he's taking me on my own growth and journey as an individual in the marketplace. There's places that he wants me to be, that in that, sometimes there's very practical things that he wants. This is an email that you should, all right guys, this is super practical. This is an email that you need to process to make this decision once. This is an email that's not for you to take care of. This is something that you should find somebody else to take care of for you. So sometimes there's practical answers. Sometimes there's not. Or they're always practical with him. But sometimes it's not in that practical sense. There's a gentleman that I've been in correspondence with. And every time I got his email, it was a business relationship with this guy. He's a believer. He's a praying man. But every time I got his email, there was a sense of just dread and frustration every time it happened. And in my mind, and just being candid, in my mind, I'm thinking, I don't like having this type of frustration and noise in my life. Let's end the business relationship. Let's overdone, part ways. Maybe it's just not a good fit. You go do your thing, I'll do mine. And we ended up on a phone conversation. And in the course of conversation, he was asking me how I was doing. And in the course of conversation, I flipped the question around. And I asked him how he was doing. And all of a sudden, there was this flood, the floodgates absolutely opened. And here this guy has been going through some very challenging times.